there's the history of the guns in America is a history of America.
Yeah.
Going right through to modern times. And the other thing too is when we talk about guns, it's a very all-encompassing topic. Now my dad, for instance, is a hunter, and he has a gun safe that has a dozen guns. Some he's won in like raffles and stuff, and he just keeps them because it might sell them someday, but otherwise he just got them, you know, collecting dust. He's got a rabbit gun, he's got a deer gun, he's got, you know, a duck gun. So he's a rifle, I should say. So these are all hunting rifles. That's, I think, a different category as someone who grew up so close to nature, where my family still go deer hunting. You know, they still engage in all of these practices of going out and, you know, making venison sausage and then eating it Thanksgiving. This stuff still happens, you know, just like in the olden days. And but then you get AR-15s, and so the question becomes, what becomes the gun you can have versus what you can't? And also now there's the the Supreme Court precedents with Scalia writing, I think, for the majority, that people have a right to basically access a handgun in self-defense. They extended the Second Amendment to include personal safety, even though it's about militias and keeping down slave revolts.
Yeah. Yeah, in the South, that was their whole thing.
Yep.
About well-regulated militia were anti-slave bands of trying to hunt down the little, you know, conclaves of escaped slaves and stuff. Yeah. So yeah, the Second Amendment has a nice little racist history built into it as well, depending on where you live.
Yeah, a lot of our founding stuff does.
Yeah, that's kind of what I mean by the whole America, you know, laying down the groundwork and then other countries around the rest of the advanced world picking the ball up and running with it, is because a lot of the stuff America laid out was what the rest of the world based their constitutions on and stuff. But they developed them quicker, and they had a more flexible attitude towards them. And also, you know, America, if you actually think about it, America the Constitution's really bigoted, you know. It says all men are created equal, so they're already ignoring women out of that. But that all men are created equal is only talking about white people. Very specifically is talking about white people. Mm-hmm.
And also, I think in the Declaration, in the Declaration of Independence, I believe there are comments in there about how, like, the King of England had dereliction of duty because he'd left them to the mercy of the savage Indians. So, you know, there are also some really uncomfortable passages in those founding documents, but they're toward the end, and people don't tend to read those out at, you know, the 4th of July picnics.
Yeah.
I've been to many of those in my day.
Yeah, and so I think I made this list that I might do a series of videos about at some point in the future. I made this list of people that I consider to be the sort of founders of the modern world, for good or bad. You know, there's a lot of heroes of mine on there, but there's also a lot of fucking horrible pieces of shit, like Gustave Le Bon, who, you know, pioneered scientific racism and you know, was an anti-working class, you know, anti-proletariat rhetoric and stuff. So, and, you know, people who guys like him and others who contributed to fascist ideologies and stuff. So there's a lot of mix of people, and one of the people on there is Thomas Jefferson. Even though Thomas Jefferson's own ideas have, to a lot of degree, been kind of undermined in modern America, he was really important for the rest of the world, you know, in terms of, because America that was the first one. That was before the French Revolution, you know, that was really the first place. It was like, let's have a secular representative republic. And so it was a really groundbreaking idea, and has since been adopted by a lot of the rest of the world in really positive ways. So even if America is kind of no longer the exemplary version of those ideas, they're still important ideas. It's just sorry, go on.
I was going to say that, you know, for me, Jefferson now, you know, as I've moved through my life, when he used to be a hero, as all the founding fathers are when you're taught at a young age in school, you learn more and more about the men behind the myth, as it were. And now when I come to issues of Thomas Jefferson, it's kind of like with Heidegger, when you're
I know what you mean.
Ideas, being in time, but then you're like, Nazi?
Yeah.
And
No.
it taints that word. And for him, like the fact that he was having sex with one of his female slaves, I'm sorry, if you own a person or they feel owned, they are incapable of giving consent. And every sexual act was rape. Men having sex with their slaves is rape. Or women, female slave owners having sex with their slaves, is rape, because they're not people able to give consent. They're not in any kind of equitable relationship. And so, yeah, that stain now is on there for him, for me, forever, but it doesn't negate some of the other really important ideas he had. It just taints them.
Yeah, and it's that whole, it's like the philosophical version of the whole art versus artist argument. Can you still enjoy, what's that book by Orson Scott Card called? The one they made that movie, Ender's Game. Can you still enjoy Ender's Game even though Orson Scott Card was is a homophobic piece of shit? Yes, you can. But unless you are yourself a homophobic piece of shit, it does have an impact if you know that is the case with him. It is a factor. You just can't totally, in a perfect world maybe you could, but in reality you can't totally separate the two things. And yes, and I think a guy like Jefferson and a guy like Heidegger, those are the philosophical, ideological versions of that. Yeah. And in that way, all the founding fathers are kind of turds.
Yeah.
They're all kind of asshats.
Yeah.
But maybe that's important to remember, because it brings the hero worship down a bit. We can still glean the good and acknowledge that these men weren't perfect. They weren't demigods. They were just guys who had some good ideas, but also had some really messed up ideas.
Yeah,
that's okay.
They were part of their time and place.
Yes.
And sure, they undercut with their ideas some of the shitty things about their time and place, but they can't undercut. No one person can undercut all the shitty things about their time and place. So they're going to have to be affected by some of them. And a good example of that is one of the people that I think is probably the most important people in history is a guy called William Wilberforce. I don't know if you've heard of him.
Yes,
he pioneered the abolitionist movement. He was the reason why the international slave trade was banned in Britain in 1807, meaning that America couldn't pick up slaves from Africa anymore. And he was also he was almost dead by the time this happened, but he was alive to see it. The banning of slaves in Britain itself, where all the slaves were freed in 1833. But he was also, he pioneered animal rights. He was the guy who led to the creation of the groups like the SPCA. And so, he was a real humanitarian guy, but he was also a right-winger. And he was conservative in a lot of ways. And so he wasn't perfect. Some of the stuff he said, you look at it now and you're like, ooh, that's pretty gross. But he was really important for getting rid of slavery and for animal rights. So you can't, it's tricky.
My angle.
Go ahead, Tom, and then I'll come in when you're done.
So, and from my angle, some of my favorite musicians are like garbage bags and Vard Vikernes. Like, I love the first few Burzum albums, but he's a white supremacist. And like, even going to like jazz, there's a lot of kind of running through jazz and a lot of like race. I forget who the guy is, but there's a jazz history book out there that's basically like written by a white, like all the history of jazz. It's like all told as like being like a white centric thing. So there's plenty of examples of people who like make really good, really love. Like I think Frank Zappa was a conservative. Vard Vikernes is a white supremacist. I'm sure. I have to reconcile.
Hater of Christians as well.
Yeah, that too. I have to reconcile all that with just the fact that I think they made really good, which is a really weird thing to separate. Yeah,
because musical ability and natural talent has nothing to do with ideology. And so you get guys like, who's that fucking redneck piece of crap in America? Yeah, who's a great guitarist.
I knew as soon as you said redneck.
Oh, yeah. You know.
Huge.
Yeah.
I wanted to get back to something. Yes, I wanted to get something back to you said, Garrett, that they were men of their time.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually a really important thing to take away from looking at the flaws of the founding fathers and the ideals that they set out. Jefferson being an example of this, is that they were men of their time. They were constrained by their circumstances. And in many ways, we are far more free than they are. So it is our duty to live up to the ideals they themselves could not embody. And we should, within every generation, get closer and closer to the ideals that our country has set out for us, but we haven't yet reached for everybody.
And that's why we can say all people are created equal, echoing the sentiment-ish of what they were saying, but actually really meaning it, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, not excluding an entire gender, not excluding ethnic minorities, or like the Irish in some cases, you know. Even some white people were considered not okay, you know. Yeah. What's
That's happening in the UK with Polish immigrants, of course.
Oh, totally. Yeah, yeah. Not just Polish, Czech, you know, Finnish, whatever. Just basically anywhere from vaguely west of like France. Mm.
Especially not the French.
Sorry, east. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I agree. The whole, and you know, it's the same with you know, I don't know if I've mentioned this on my channel much, but I'm a Buddhist. I don't have religious beliefs, but it's a you know, philosophical way of life, philosophical ideology, and it's the same with him. He was a man of his time, you know, and so he was able to subvert some of the preconceived notions of his era, but not all. For example, he rejected the idea of the human soul, which was totally intrinsic to Hinduism, totally rejected that, but didn't reject reincarnation, because some things are just too built in to the fabric of your society. They're just taken for granted, you know, like the soul is among a lot of religious people now, you know. So to question certain things, it's like questioning the troops in America. You just can't do it, you know. You can't say they're aggressive invaders of other countries. No, they're defenders of American freedoms, even though that doesn't make any sense, you know. It's the same thing with reincarnation in his time. It was just too close to home to question it, so he didn't. He built it into his philosophy. So yeah, you know. And now when we look now, Buddhists, modern Buddhism can reject it because there's no evidence for it. And around that, aside from that, with that one issue, Theravadan Buddhism, the original version, is pretty scientific. Like, they rejected a lot of things where they don't have evidence for them because there was no evidence for them. But reincarnation was just a step too far. But now we can go, okay, that also has no evidence for it, so we can reject that too. Fuck it, you know? It doesn't matter.
Yeah, Buddhism was my last step before atheism, and I was a practicing Mahayana Buddhist for about 5 years.
I don't vibe with Mahayana. There's too many like there's weird shit in that. Although I take some aspects of Chan Buddhism, which is the Chinese version of Zen Buddhism, the original Chinese version. But yeah, there's too many like gods, weird deities and shit and all that. Theravadan is really stripped back to the real essentials, the fundamentals, the basics, you know.
Yeah, and that's what I ended up doing, which was basically keeping all the good practical advice, self-reflection of the Buddhist teachings, and throwing out anything supernatural.
Exactly.
And I basically kept that. I've kept that as a moral framework because it works really well. It's very ethical. It's very human life and positive. And there were elements of sexism in his day too that we can now overcome.
But he himself actually wasn't very sexist.
No.
It's really interesting. Like, if you look at his history with nuns, the idea of having nuns, originally he was against it, but not because he didn't think that women had a place in his religion. It was because he was worried that because his religion was so popular, he would basically travel around India or modern day Nepal in some cases, and he would go to a town and he would like give a speech or whatever, and a bunch of people from the town would become monks and give up their role in that town, their role in society. And he was worried how many people were doing it. Like, he was kind of gutting these communities. And when the idea of nuns was floated, he was like, that's going to gut it twice as much. And so he was originally against it, but his own mother, who was the first nun, basically convinced him that was bullshit, and that that he's not responsible for that. People are making their own choices, and if they want to make the choice to leave their community and become an ascetic, become a monastic, then that's up to them, not up to him. And he was like, yeah, that's true. All right, nuns are cool. And from that point on, nuns were basically considered equal in his time. However, there are some Buddhist communities now who are sexist. In Thailand, for example, you can't become a full nun. You can only become what's called an anagarika, which is like a trainee, a guy who's like entry level. That's as far as you can go as a woman, which is sexist as fuck, and it's why I don't like the Thai Buddhist system at all.
Yeah, but it was also the first monastic system for women ever founded, if I'm remembering my history correctly.
That's correct. Yep. Jainism did not allow women. Other ascetic parts of Hinduism didn't allow women. Yep. That's correct.
But yeah, it's a good moral framework to start from if you're ever like, because there's a lot of thinking through things, and it's based on things that humanists would support, which is compassion.
Yeah.
And, that whole thing, like, just don't hurt other people.
Ahimsa. Yep, that's called, harmlessness. But yeah, what I think is really important about Buddhism is that not only is it a good framework for a way of life, but it's also really compatible with the modern world in a surprising way. If you actually look, there's the original Buddhist equivalent of a Bible. It's called the Pali Canon or the Tipitaka, and it's very, very long. It's like 32 volumes or something. It's like a whole bookshelf instead of a book. And you don't really need to read most of it, but because a lot of it's really deeply technical, sort of advanced stuff that you really don't need to. But there's one part of it called the Abhidharma, or Abhidharma, which is basically Buddhist psychology and laid the groundwork for what is still the core of modern psychology in the West. They took it all from there, basically. Jung. His whole thing was like 50% Abhidharma, And so it's amazing that something written 2,500 years ago is relevant to today and very much useful.
The Buddhist philosophy of mind, they went into a lot of different places.
That's
and there's
exactly
a lot
what
of
Abhidharma is all about, There's like this thing called the 5 baskets, which is how Buddha discounted the idea of a soul. Because basically what he said is that nature has what is necessary for it to continue as a system. And if a system can exist without souls, which is possible, right, then they probably aren't there, because that is sort of how nature works, is it weeds out what isn't necessary, which is a reductive way to look at it from a point of view of a modern citizen of the world. But in his time was revolutionary and makes a ton of sense if you think about it. It's like, okay, well, if an organism can exist without a soul, they probably do exist without a soul. It's Occam's razor again. And that was a revolutionary idea, and a really important one. And the 5 baskets basically divides up the human being into one part, the body, and the other 4 parts are the aspects of the mind. So he was the first one to codify what we call consciousness, and what we call thought processes. That he separated the mind into its various categories. That is basically still the sort of core of epistemology.
The sense of non-self or no self.
Yeah,
not only
no core.
Right.
There's no essential you.
Yes, and this is more than just sort of like a soul, but the idea of there not being an essential you, that you are a constant stream of experiences and emotional reactions and intake and change, yet you feel like a solid phenomenon, that somehow there's an I. Yes, there's a sense of the I, and if you want to experience the I, think that you're on when you're on a plane and there's turbulence and you get this crap scared out of you, that's the I. Oh my God, I am going to die. That's your most profound experience of the I. But that's an illusion. And so if you can get beyond grasping and protecting your ego, like we do here, and a lot of times you have to do it online with not letting what people say get to you, not letting it affect your I, because there is no I. It is a very helpful way to get a perspective on things, and also to understand how people are transient and we change and other people change.
Exactly. And that was a very, very revolutionary idea in 500 BCE India. And is still, to some degree, a pretty revolutionary idea now, which is amazing.
And people go on about Jesus, like, all he did was repeat things, and it made them slightly more intense, like, fencing off.
You cut out there, Christy.
Oh,
the last
sorry.
thing I heard you say was fencing off.
Yeah, and then, you got Buddha 500 years earlier discussing philosophy of mind and sensory input. You kind of rate these two guys as philosophers.
Yeah, but Buddha coined terms that we still use now. Thought processes is one that I mentioned earlier, but sense perception or sense data is another one. That, that you're basically what the world really is when you get right down to it is your sense organs and the data that they take in. And beyond that, everything is basically guesswork, And Descartes would take that idea even further and say even the sense data is guesswork. Yeah. But I think the most important thing about Buddhism is one particular, very short work inside the Tipitaka called the Kalama Sutta. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it was a totally new concept. Jainism had kind of floated it, but it was, in terms of the scale that Buddhism reached, was revolutionary, is the idea that of skepticism. What he says in the Kalama Sutta, basically he goes to this town, and the people in the town are like, tell us how the world is, you know, oh wise, we've heard how what a sage you are and how smart you are. Tell us, explain the world to us. And he's like, I can't do that. That's up to you. You know, I can give you some of my opinions, but you shouldn't trust them just because I'm a wise guy and other people told you I'm smart. You can't, you have to use your own brains and take in everything and then work out whether you think it's right or not. And he gave a list of reasons why you shouldn't automatically just accept something. Like, don't accept it because a wise guy said it. Don't accept it because it was taken as a given by the society you were raised in, which is something he was not totally able to do in terms of reincarnation, but, you know, anyway. So he's like a whole, don't do it. Don't believe it just because the king said it. Don't believe it just because the powerful elites agree on it, you know. Well, and it was really the foundation of skepticism, in my opinion, that I know of. It took Christians, for example, a lot longer than that to come up to start bringing in ideas of skepticism. So yeah, that is the key text in my opinion, and it's why I call myself a Buddhist, because that text is extremely important to me.
You know, it's funny you say that, because I remember I was kind of in a place where I knew I wasn't a Catholic anymore, and I knew that monotheism didn't make any sense on moral or logical levels, and I looked at Hinduism a bit and sat in on a couple like Dharma-light, they were called, sessions with a local Buddhist group, Kadampa Buddhism.
Yeah.
And the third one.
So don't even get me started on those people. That's a cult. Yeah.
Well, I turned out okay.
Yeah.
They were all really nice to me and not cultish. But anyway, we can talk about that another time.
Yeah.
And I think the third one I went to, the monk who was giving the teaching, to paraphrase the teaching from Buddha, who said, you know, don't take my teachings just because they call me teacher. Test them as you would gold.
Yeah.
And hammer them out and put them into practice. And only then will you know they are true.
Yeah.
And I've never heard of that concept before, of a religious leader saying, look, don't believe me just because, you know, they give me a title. Go and take this and try it. And then you'll know for yourself whether it's true. And that to me was just when I was like, okay, I want to hear more.
Not only is that not said in other mainstream religions, it's the opposite of what is said in other mainstream religions. Like literally, Jesus said, I am the light and the way and all that crap. Buddha would never say anything like that, because that is some self-aggrandizing, arrogant, you know, what do you call it? Delusions of grandeur bullshit, you know. And it's totally just off the rails in terms of you trying to pretend to be a sagacious person who should be a leader of ideas, you know. It's a bankrupt way to and, you know, and Buddha also had this thing where he said that, this is totally paraphrasing, it's not, I can't remember where it's from, what sutta it's from, but he basically said that, oh God, I'm losing my train of thought here. Oh crap, I'm going to have to rewatch this and go, what was I talking about again? Something he said. God, I can't remember. He said a lot of stuff.
Well, other teachers,
This is pretty heavy stuff.
Jesus saying it, but I've never heard any of my teachers in any of my classes ever say, well, you don't have to believe me just because it's in my lecture notes. Go do your own research and find out whether or not it's true. I mean, that's learn how we are taught to learn.
Oh, that's right. He said, if everyone in the world thought the same way, all human thought would stop. And that it is only by a variety of ideology that human thought is able to progress. So he literally said, if everyone in the world became a Buddhist, it would be a disaster both for everyone in the world and for Buddhism. It would be the end. And so, yeah, I think that is something you don't hear. That's the opposite of most religion as well. It's an anti-proselytizing thing. And actually, you know, when I was in Korea, I actually had a go at a monk on the street for proselytizing. I was like, Buddha said you shouldn't do this. What are you doing? You're not allowed to do this. And, you know, called him out for it. And I also noticed he was smoking cigarettes, which is also fucked up. But anyway, yeah.
Bad monk.
Yeah, and he was selling art as well. The whole thing was very un-Buddhist.
Oh, I think I saw some of those guys in Chicago. They try to sell you a picture, and I'm like, no Buddhist I know would be on the street selling tat for $2 a pop. No, thank you. This is a scam.
I can quote exactly what Buddha said and why you shouldn't do that. It's part of the Noble Eightfold Path, you know, which is a series of lessons of how to live like a decent human being, and one of them is don't profit off shit like that. You know, if it's being done in the name of the religion, of the ideology, it's called right livelihood. You know, you shouldn't, for example, make your living selling trinkets that have magical powers or talismans and all that kind of shit, because that is bullshit. You know, it's fraud. And so, you see people in Thailand selling like little Buddhist trinkets that are supposed to be like lucky charms. That's totally not okay. You know.
Yeah, that happened to me in New York City one time, where like a guy. Nice beads, like a wristband or whatever, and he was like, "Oh, thank you very much." But then, like, he tried to get us to give him like $5, like building a school someplace. But I don't know, it felt very strange to me. Like, I don't know, maybe it's going toward a cause, maybe it's not. I have no idea.
Yeah.
Bounce for like 30 seconds. Just keep talking.
Yeah, sweet as. Yeah, maybe we could even talk about something other than Buddhism. I don't know. It's something I haven't really addressed that much on my channel, but I will at some point.
Can story, but yeah, I do. Like I've said before, I have a lot of time for it because its approach is very practical, and it is one thing that you can personally test out and give it a couple weeks and see how you feel. And there's nothing supernatural about it. As you said, a lot of it's just psychology. The idea that, if you feel jealousy a lot, you need to practice rejoicing in others' happiness. So when something good happens to your coworker and you start to feel jealous, go, no, I need to rejoice. Something good happened to them. I can be happy about that. And these little steps, turn you into a happier person.
Exactly. Yeah. Indeed. Yeah. There's a thing called the Karaniya Metta Sutta, which translates roughly as as universal loving kindness. Which is all about basically wishing everything in the world a good day, basically. Everything, even those you disagree with, those you hate, whatever. Because it's not about you actually like trying to mystically make them all happy. It's about you. It's about that mindset is more positive for the person wishing the happiness. It makes you a better person and more happy person. And so it's very practical. It's not like trying to mystically wish everyone in the world was happy and there was no suffering, because the very, very, very most central thing about Buddhism is there is suffering. That's a fact. And so, yeah, it's about making the person who's doing the wishing a better human being, And if you start every day by reading that out, it genuinely does make you a better person.
Yeah, one of the weird things when I would go to the center would be when we would do the various, ceremony things where you'd do the, I can't remember, they're called sadhanas, I think. And, you'd have to do the bowing, which is very big in Southeastern and Asia and East Asian culture. And it felt weird to me, like as an American and also as someone who wanted to get away from Catholicism, where there's a lot of kneeling. But there are obviously all traditions behind this, but one way to think about it is, as somebody explained, that you don't have to think about it as, respecting a statue of Buddha. You can think about getting your mind ready to hear teachings. And it's kind of like a physical act for you to kind of start to associate with a quieter mind and listening now and thinking and reflecting. So there are ways to look at these rituals that aren't necessarily about supernatural or worship, but sort of this a Tai Chi or meditative practices of the body that are not really found except for maybe when you hurt yourself in the Christian tradition. Their focus on the body is usually quite negative. So
yeah. I actually wrote a book a long time ago now, 2005 maybe. I never published it because I don't think it was good enough, but it was about Buddhist cults. And I use the term cult probably in a more severe way than you might. Like I called Kadampa a cult, where I guess maybe by the dictionary definition of what a cult is, it might not be. But there's certain words that are just used in a more strict, not strict, the opposite, I guess, way in Buddhism, like a heresy, for example. You can be heretical about Buddhism in a way that like you wouldn't use that word in another religion. For example, what you were just saying about ritual, that is one of the reasons why I don't hang out in Buddhist circles and stuff, because that is against the Kalama Sutta. That's believing in something just because of tradition. Don't, you know, it says literally in there, don't do it just because it's tradition. So I reject that stuff. Like, for example, they one group I was at wanted people to chant in Pali, you know, the dead Indian language Pali. And I was like, I don't even know what this means. I'm not going to chant something that I don't know what it means. So no, I'm not going to do that. And they don't really like that when you don't want to do that stuff. So I don't really hang out with them. I do spend some time at a monastery that's a while away from my house, because those are just decent. Those monks are really cool and stuff. Yeah, and that was that was actually new Kadampa, which is even more culty than traditional Kadampa. For people that don't know, Kadampa is a Tibetan style of Buddhism that was competing with Vajrayana, which is mainstream Tibetan Buddhism. They've always been sort of competing with each other, and basically Vajrayana won, and Kadampa's basically been sidelined. And then there was this version of it called New Kadampa that was created mostly in the West, which is very culty and very weird. I went there to put up...
I'd say I was NKT. Just so I went,
oh, right,
yes.
So you were the really weird
My experience was...
A lot of them are probably okay, but like here's the story that I had with them. So I at the end of one of my stays at the monastery that I go to, I haven't gone there in years, but you know, sometimes, I was passing out flyers at Buddhist groups because they were getting this really world-renowned monk called Ajahn Brahmavamsa, who's like a big deal in the Theravadan world. He was coming to give a talk, and so they were like, oh my god, this is a huge deal. So they were passing out flyers. I went to the new Kadampa center in my city, and the guy was like, oh, we don't accept outside teachings here. And he wouldn't let me put the flyer up. I was like, you are a cultist. Fuck you, basically.
That is...
Ugh. Well, that's a bit like asking a Catholic...
What does it fucking mean? Like, it's totally bullshit.
It's kind of like asking a Catholic church to have a Mormon person come in and preach, though. I mean...
No, but it wasn't. They weren't speaking there. They were speaking at the monastery. It was just a fly. It was just an ad for that, you know. And they're supposed to be Buddhist, right? So, I don't know. It seemed very weird. And, you know, that's fine. Your analogy doesn't quite work, because Christianity and Buddhism aren't the same, you know. They don't have the same emphasis on free thought, you know. That goes against what Buddhism is supposed to be about, to say, well, you don't accept outside teachings. That's insanity. Buddha would never have stood for that. Yeah.
Well, I was in there for 5 years and went to some of the, empowerment rituals, kind of things. And I was never asked for money. It was all donations, and it was a very nice group of people, and I really have nothing but nice things to say about them. So
I mean,
my experience...
There are way worse Buddhist cults in the world than them. Way worse. I mean, they make them look like totally fine by comparison. The worst one is...
Yeah, I guess I would just disagree with the characterization of cult. I mean, that might be your term for it, but I'll just go on record saying that was not my experience, or anyone that I knew, experience at all. So just for the record.
Yeah,
okay.
That's fine. But yeah, there are definitely ones that I would not hear dissent about them being a cult, because they fit the dictionary definition of what a cult is, like Soka Gakkai International. I don't know if you know about them, but they're a Japanese Buddhist cult who are extremely aggressive and have enemies and stuff. It's just a very weird thing, not Buddhist at all. They have this rivalry with another Buddhist group called... I can't remember the name of it now, but they basically have this hate boner for another Buddhist group, and they were doing things like wiretapping the houses of some members of this group. They were installing cameras and stuff. They
crazy.
They would stalk and harass people who tried to leave the group for any reason. They at one point did invade like a home invasion equivalent on a not a monastery, but like a religious center for this other group. They ran in and like with weapons, and it's crazy. And those guys are part of what are called the new religions in Japan in the 50s after World War II. A whole bunch of cults basically sprung up, and some of them became state endorsed. Like Soka Gakkai was state endorsed for a while, maybe still is. I don't have no idea. And they were all like Scientology level sort of cults, you know. Very weird stuff. Very, very weird indeed. If you want to have a fascinating read about a group that is totally going against everything that's supposed to stand for, Then Soka Gakkai is a good place to start. Another one is Aum Shinrikyo, also Japanese, also one of the new religions.
Love them, yeah.
Yeah, they're not actually a Buddhist cult because nobody really considers them, takes them seriously as Buddhists. But they basically a hodgepodge of Eastern thought mashed together in a way that really conflicts and is mutually exclusive. So they're a fucking mess. But they did that sarin gas attack on the Tokyo subway. They're terrorists.
Tokyo, yeah.
Yeah, they're and that was in the 90s, and they've been defunct basically for a long time. But those guys are crazy as well. Worth reading about as well.
There was that episode of Game Theory about them.
Oh yeah, really?
Yeah, where like the Aum Shinrikyo was basically parodied episode, but it's cool.
You cut out there.
Did I? Basically, the Amba kind of parodied in Earthbound. Like, there's a similar group who all dresses in blue and does a bunch of weird cultish shit.
I've actually seen that episode, the Earthbound episode. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.